Okay, we need to go ahead and start wrapping up. Moderators, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to kind of gather your thoughts before you present. It's plenty of time, right? Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started with our summary presentations. I know it's hard to stop talking. Okay, we're going to start with Jen Aponte. She's going to go through her 2 questions. And then everyone else will go up to the front. But we're going to start with Jen. Let me grab my watch real quick. Yep. Don't start yet. Yes. If you would be so kind, if you took notes and can share that with us, or leave a copy of those with your moderator. On Sunday, we will present the findings from this whole meeting to the big group, and we would love to have any additional notes. The moderators took notes, but if there's anything else that you can copy or leave behind, that would be great. So Jen's going to go through her 2 questions. 4 minutes each is all you'll have. I'm going to go upstairs and get turned down. Okay, Jen, you ready?
Yep.
I'm actually going to give you 4 minutes and 30 seconds because we have a couple extra minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, let's listen to Jen, if you'll read your question first.
Yes, ma'am.
And then kind of give us the summary of what your table discussed.
Yes, we had first of all, in the first session, we had question number 2. It says 85% of survey respondents take medication for ALGS. However, 43% said medication is not effectively treating their symptoms. Is variability the only cause of the medications not being effective? How can this be addressed in the clinical setting to improve medication outcome? Do I have to read the goals? Okay. So we discussed that the regulation and clinical trial standards are usually to blame for a lot of these medicines not being effective for all, because there's such a variability in the symptoms that you're either not sick enough or too sick, or you need the medication too quickly, or you don't need the medication. And, sometimes this criteria can delay, the results and not produce accurate enough results for everybody to be covered under a medicine. The other thing we discussed is that the medicines we have for Alagille, whether it be for itching, whether it be for cholestasis, whether it be for whatever other symptom, do not address the true root of the problem. It all either stems from the liver, and then we discussed yesterday in the meeting the notch and the jagged and the this and that. So if you're not addressing that, it's really not going to be effective because you're really not treating the root of the problem. The other thing that we discussed was that these medicines were developed for other things and were found incidentally to be, working for Alagille, but they've really never been tested on Alagille. They've never been, there has not been tracking. There has not been studies done on whether the medications we already have work in Alagille specifically, because cholestasis in Alagille is not the same thing as cholestasis in other liver diseases. So we don't have like a database from clinicians. We don't have a study that says, okay, so rifampin is the gold standard for itching because it works. There was a study and somebody said it worked, and it kind of works on a shotgun basis, and we don't know. So the solutions, we need more involvement in clinical trials. We need bigger populations. We need more information on clinical trials. We need bigger samples. We need them to be available in more centers across the country. So that requires more networking within research, between researchers and clinicians and pharmaceutical companies and organizations like the ALGS. We need a standard of care that is better also. A standard of care that is better in terms of what we know, what works, and what we know works for the majority, a very big majority of these cases regarding the symptom that you're treating. For example, for itching, all the kids that itch, okay, so is it bile acid? Is it this? Is it that? Once you develop the testing to find out what the problem is for a particular patient, there should be a standard of care. Okay, so if you're itching because your bile acids are like 300, this is the medication that you should be on. If it's another cause, then this is the medication you should be on. The other solution we had proposed is the organizations like the ALGS should interact with the FDA and the regulatory and the big guns in Washington and do some lobbying and spread more awareness, because a lot of these big organizations and these big government agencies don't do a lot for the kids is because they don't know. Okay, so the second question that we just tackled is, question number 5, was nutrition growth and malabsorption of vitamins is the second highest concern among survey respondents after itch. What are the top 3 to 5 priorities in this category, and what options are the options to positively address these concerns? So we were talking about these medicines are not palatable. The kids won't have them, or, and if they won't have them, they won't absorb them because they keep vomiting them, and it's traumatic and this and that. So it's part of one of the things that we were discussing is to make these things more palatable and better for the kids. The other thing is we have no growth charts. We were talking to Dr. Piccoli, which we have the privilege to have on our table. And there has not been an accurate growth chart for Alagille for 30 years. So we need to kind of go into that. The absorption of these nutrients and these medicines and these vitamins has to do with bile salts. So we have to do more research on that, and we have to kind of get more information on how we can develop and research more mechanisms for the kids to better absorb these nutrients and these vitamins and these minerals and such. So the other, they don't have, the bile salts are all over the place for these kids. So that's another problem, The inadequacy of insurance, because a lot of these kids don't have good insurance, or insurance doesn't cover vitamins, and parents are left in a position where they have to either spread out their doses or spread out their vitamins because we honestly can't afford a 300 vitamin for just one vitamin every month. So, there's a very big gap in, as far as insurance in nutritional supplements, which are almost never covered, and vitamins, which are almost never covered nowadays. So the solutions we came to get, we put together a growth curve that Dr. Piccoli says that they're already working on putting a new updated growth curve for the kids and the adults. Tube feeding, we need education because there are other ways of feeding these kids. And I understood, because he explained to our table that when you tube feed, you can control what's in it and you can control the amount. And it doesn't, you don't have to make them eat a certain amount of thing by mouth, which is sometimes physically impossible. So we need to educate about the graces of tube feeding, whether it be G-tube, NG-tube, TPN, or whatever it is, to parents of kids who need them. It's not the end of the world. You have to, be open to this because it would be a benefit to the child. Of course, we have to get together with insurance regulators and big guns in Washington and all that. This is mine. To help us with the insurability of these supplements and these vitamins because these kids really need them. And we need national support for the kids in terms of insurance and in terms of coverage and in terms of medical, because we shouldn't have to spread our vitamins and our supplements just so they can last us a month, because it's in detriment to the health of the kids. So we should have teams going out to local governments, going out to federal governments, and trying to get these things covered. Just because a parent has income doesn't mean that your kid's not disabled and that you need to be thrown under the bus. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Stephanie, you want to come up to the podium since you're... Okay, so 4 minutes for each question. I'll stand up at 30 seconds. Okay, that's good. Okay. You good?
Yeah.
You sure?
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
All right, I'm seeing this podium way too much. All right, so I had question number 4. And so to repeat the question, 62% of survey respondents have received at least one insurance denial. Can families coming together along with their clinicians and patient advocacy groups impact this? What type of systems could potentially be put in place to change this high rate of denials? So as far as different gaps, let's just make sure I have the right paper. A few things that we kind of jotted down was the coverage of vitamins. So I know that we've talked a little bit about this from a coverage perspective, where we have challenges with getting access to vitamins like K and D. So that was one of the topics that we had brought up. And then from an insurance coverage perspective, I think we all know that all insurance is not made equal. And as I shared in my personal story, I thought I was doing the right thing by switching insurance, but in reading some of the fine print, found out that her formula that she needed for her G-tube was actually denied because I can't remember the language. I have my denial letter, but there was some specific language that basically almost means that the only way that she would really be kind of given an exception to this process is if she was 100% reliant on our formula. And so those of you that have tube-fed kids knows that, sometimes they're kind of in the middle. So maybe it's 80% or 90%, and then some of it's taken orally. But the way the language was written in the denial letter, it almost stated that it was supposed to be 100%. To get some type of exception or to have a voice heard with that denial process. Some of the other things that we talked about is the lack of resources. And I guess I can kind of go back and forth. So in terms of lack of resources, what we mean is, when you're faced with a denial, like what type of letters do you need? Not only from the clinician standpoint, but then also from a patient standpoint. What kind of templates or tools or even a checklist can be made available. And maybe we start with the Alliance and having some of this information centralized on the website. If there's any other organizations out there that are advocates for people that are struggling to get something appealed, what are those resources? So definitely resources is probably key, because I know a lot of us kind of shared, when you're dealing with these denials, you kind of feel lost in the process and you don't know where to start. And you do start with your doctor, but however, they're also at the mercy of insurance sometimes. So, definitely want to have more of more information and literature around that. And then another thing that was interesting, so a challenge would be, as you get the denials, and I just looked at this as I was sitting next to, is it Dr. Loomis? There she is. She actually took a look at my denial, and although the way it was coded was failure to thrive, are there opportunities to add in and layer on other codes and challenges that our children face from an Alagille's perspective? So would that have changed the decisioning process? And so having that additional insight, I think, would also be beneficial. And I know we talked a little bit about this, but from a medication perspective, although, it's not really a denial, but, just the pricing, just the fluctuation in pricing, even from a vitamin perspective does become a challenge. And then the other thing was genetic testing. From a coverage perspective, I know a lot of us have had different paths to getting genetic testing done, and sometimes it's later in the game of the diagnosis, and sometimes it's early on. So having the support of insurance and finding ways to get that genetic testing early on in the diagnosis, I think would be also helpful and critical. So as far as other things that I may be missing here that I didn't touch on, that would help, testimonials. I think those of us that have been successful in the denial process, hearing your stories and what did you do to get those appeal or get those things approved through insurance, I think is key. So any best practices that can be shared, I think would be useful. And I know Dr. Loomis had shared something about, and I don't know if this applies, from a genetic perspective, are there different ways to get that done? And I think Dr. Loomis had mentioned some testing that's being done through Emory Genetics Lab, right? And maybe looking at ways to get some testing done, and I think Retrophin is the sponsor of that. So, just working different angles to get information and get things done that may be useful if insurance isn't working. And then just an advocacy sheet. So, with the Alliance, and I don't know if it's out there today, but, having an advocacy sheet that kind of outlines, if you are faced with a denial, here's some things in language that we want to also include. And then also having legal backing. So do we have on the advisory board or within our team where we have legal access so they can provide us the proper language when we're faced with these denials as a family or, as a caregiver. So that's pretty much it. Yep, sure. Okay, number 5. So number 5, nutrition growth, malabsorption of vitamins is the second highest concern among survey respondents after itch. What are the top 3 to 5 priorities in this category, and what are the options to positively address the concerns? So we kind of talked a little bit about this, and I think each of us at the table kind of shared our own stories. So we talked about nutritional education, so that was kind of a key topic, understanding, the aspect from the nutrition side, and then maybe having folks represented in a forum like the symposium where we have people that are nutritional experts or dietitians to help educate us in balancing a diet of someone that's faced with Alagilles. Let's see here. Formula. So I know a lot of us, a lot of our Alagille's children, they face, different challenges even with formula. So there's a lot of different options, and then also looking at ways where we can make those adjustments as needed. And I know a few of us at the table, we have our children on a standard, formula that they've been taking for years and years and years. But when is it okay to pivot and change and try something different that may be new to market? And I know some of us had shared other options and alternatives, and also have the clinician that may be following your child actually be open to the idea of switching. So, sometimes not all things always work and are consistently working, but again, when is it okay to pivot and change up that nutritional routine? Let's see. List of foods. So we talked about food a lot at our table. So, when we're thinking not only from a G2 perspective, but also from an oral perspective, we know a lot of these children and adults are very picky. So knowing what types of foods that will help with absorption would be useful. And then, let's see here. And I think we touched, I don't know if this has any relevance, and anyone from the table, if you can add anything more to this. I think someone had mentioned what can be combined to improve absorption, and maybe potentially doing a study around that particular topic with food and absorption, and having more information and data around that. I think that would be beneficial. And then we also talk about medication and vitamin sequencing. So again, many of us at the table are families that deal with Alagille. And, with that being said, we all administer our medication to our children or even to ourselves a little differently. So is there a benefit with having medication done all at one time, or do we separate those vitamins out and give them at different times and with different types of food? So really understanding the sequencing process of that, I think would also be useful from an education perspective. And so other things that I just wanted to touch on from just, again, an opportunity and just solutions is to have more practical information that's out there for learning. So I know that we do the podcast now, so maybe bringing on like a nutritionist or a dietitian to help share some of those learnings and resources. A webinar also was also mentioned. And then other resources. If we are near a clinic that has a nutritionist or dietitian kind of integrated with the gastroenterology department, what options do those of us what options do we have from a care perspective if we don't have those options in our local market? So seeing what information can be shared there. And then I think that's pretty much it. I know I've been rambling a little bit and kind of going back and forth, but I wanted to add some context to our bullet points.
This is like speed questions. Okay, what about Shami? Shami, you want to come on up? You have 4 minutes for each, and I'm going to stand up when you have 30 seconds left.
Good afternoon. So I got questions 2 and 6. So 2 was 85% of the survey respondents take medication for ALGS. However, 43% say that the medication is not effectively treating their symptoms. Is variability the only cause of the medication not being effective, and how can this be addressed in the clinical setting? So while we were talking about the challenges, some of the things that came up was that as patients or parents, we don't know what the drug is supposed to do. Like, we don't know what the level of expectation is. Like, is it supposed to take away 25% of the itching, or is it supposed to, improve growth by, say, 5% if you're taking some kind of hormone? We don't know what to expect from the given dosage of the drug we're taking. And so when we watch, when parents are watching their kids, or when we're observing our own symptoms, we don't know if we're taking something that's actually helping us or not. So that kind of contributes to the variability and how effective the therapy is for us as individuals. The other thing, which one of our family members, Amy Foley, where is she? She's not here. There she is. So yeah, one of the things that she brought up is that we don't know at what age do the dosages need to change, or do they need to change? Do we need to have a point as the child is growing up that we examine the current dosage of things and the current frequency of testing? There's no age appropriate change in the care, which kind of feeds into the second question that I had. The second, there were a couple of other challenges. Hang on. And so some of the researchers who were there on our table talked about how there's no correlation between, I hope I get this right, phenotype and genotype. How, for example, if I have a JAG1 mutation, how does that affect my severity versus another ALGS patient's severity? Because of that, researchers are probably having a difficulty trying to decide how much to put in each drug and how much of the drug to give to each patient. So again, building on what Jen and her group had said, about the variance and the lack of data. So when we were talking and we were going through some of the suggestions from the researchers and the doctors and from us as families, we looked at the fact that we need patient literacy. We need families and patients need to be more empowered and more informed as to what the drugs do. So I think Ed Foley was the one who spoke about the Davis drug book and, looking up a drug when he's prescribed it by a doctor to see if it's actually something for ALGS or if it's something that's for, say, TB. And if it's just being given to us because that's the only available medicine, and if there are any side effects to that. So this idea that, you do your own research, that you ask intelligent questions to doctors, or you push back if you're not sure that this is a medicine that's going to work for you, or if you've taken it for a while and you've seen that it's actually causing more problems than helping you, how to communicate that to the doctor in the clinical setting, and how that goes back as feedback to researchers, and whether that can ultimately some kind of channel of communication, basically. And a lot of that starts with patient literacy. So that was one of the solutions to this variance problem and this lack of data problem. And one of the other things that, I forget which researcher suggested this, I didn't take it down, was that we need data on environmental factors. So we live as patients all over the world, and what we eat is different, what we breathe is different, what we do is different. The kind of doctors that we see are different. Some doctors are more conservative in their treatment. Some are willing to try new therapies. So this environmental difference as well could feed into the variance and the data we have and the data we can collect. So we need data on environmental factors and how that impacts the treatment and the drug dosage and how patients react to that. Well, that was for question 2. I'm going to move on to question 6, which is a very emotionally charged topic for me. It's about young adults, and our adults sometimes feel research will never impact them. Their challenges are also different than that of younger patients, and ALGS adults may many times live with hopelessness, higher rates of depression, undiagnosed pain, and even credibility sort of issues in a clinical setting. What is lacking currently for ALGS adults, and how can we greatly improve their future experiences quickly? So we had the honor of having Joe's sister, Jeanette, on our table, and wow, she had some powerful things to say. She really, opened up, and she shared the last couple of years of Joe's life and what he went through as a patient and as an adult patient. And it was an eye-opener for me as well, because there were certain things that I'm starting to feel as an adult patient, which I didn't even know were a real thing. I just felt it in my head, which is what a lot of adult patients feel. They think that they're just feeling it, and it may not be something related to ALGS. It may not be something that can be treated or that can be looked at as part of ALGS, management and care. And how that factors into everything else we do, our mental well-being, our motivation levels, our education, our ability to hold a job. She shared with us, Jeanette shared with us some really painful moments in Joe's life regarding jobs and holding a job and being able to live normally, with fulfillment and happiness and joy. And I sort of related to some of that, and I think many young adults do as well, because it's a sense of hopelessness, and it's a sense of, well, will I be able to make a meeting tomorrow, or will I finish my coursework for my degree, to get a job? And so that dilemma of how when you're unsure about where your medical prognosis and where your care is going and how it feeds into every other aspect of your life was what we thoroughly dissected it, I think, in the meeting, in our group. And what we realized is that because there's so little data for adult care, we need to start sort of compiling some. And we had some very useful suggestions from Dr. Kamath. I don't know where she is now. Is she here? Oh, okay. Yeah, so, we talked about how you can't really publish things in a research paper kind of setting because there's no evidence to back, recommendations or guidelines, but instead informally, like through the Alliance or through us as adult patients, we can come together and make a list of sort of recommendations and suggested timelines of what you need to get checked every year, like your thyroid levels or your liver levels, and what kind of suggested foods would react well, what kind of level of activity would react well, just a kind of list of recommendations that we can live by informally as best as we can till the science can sort of kick in and prove or disprove or suggest something new. And we had a conversation about foods and about I was talking about juicing because I juice a lot, and I had like growth spurts because of that when I was like 20, 22, and that's just me. There's no science behind it. I wasn't asked to do it by a doctor or anything, but what we realized is we need to track what we're eating and what we're doing in terms of activity, like swimming and exercise and that kind of thing, and that could potentially help researchers to include the adult perspective as well in their research and maybe even publish papers or give us suggestions on how to manage our condition as we get older. So yeah, that was us.
Okay, thank you, Shami. So Tara's group is going to send up a different representative. Nancy, all right, Dr. Spinner is going to come up and talk to us about that first question, and then Chris, you're going to come up? Sounds good.
I'm going to be brief. So our question had to do with misdiagnosis, which I would like to solve by inviting everybody to come to CHOP for a free consult with Dr. Piccoli, and he will take care of that. But there were concerns about misdiagnosis, especially as the differential diagnosis between biliary atresia and Alagille syndrome. And we all recognize that this is a problem, that there's a very tight time window, and this has led us to think about, can we do the genetic testing faster? And when I get back, I'm going to look into setting up a stat panel. For a lot of other disorders that I'm the division chief for the Genomic Diagnostics Division at CHOP, so we do all the genetic testing. And for a lot of other disorders, the clinicians are much pushier and they insist on getting very rapid tests, and maybe we can do better. So we'll certainly look into that. But I think the question of, can we use the molecular genetics, which we're so happy and proud of? The whole question of education, which has come up, I thought that Benita's comments were very well taken, that it's not that other doctors aren't aren't smart or great, but that these are very rare disorders. But what can the Alliance do to get the word out there? You're all sitting here right now, so I think right now all of your doctors know so much more about Alagille syndrome than they did before you went to see them. So I think there's some of that. I don't know in the GI world. I'm a geneticist. But, is it possible, are these questions on the board exams? Are you guys all writing board questions for pediatrics exams? Why aren't there any Cincinnati residents here at this meeting? One of the best ways to learn about it, you would learn so much from being at the symposium tomorrow. I don't know if some of them are coming. Stacy, are your residents coming? Because this is an incredible opportunity to recognize the facial features, recognize, all of these various things. So maybe baby steps in a lot of different directions. Is there more information that can go out on the Alagille Alliance website? Is there more information that can go out on the CHOP website? Bonita pointed out that the children website, or Kathy did, that the children website is a great source of information. So how do we make sure that the minute someone Googles cholestasis, they get all the information they need? Because they're not Googling Alagille syndrome until they know they have that diagnosis. So I think those were the things that we had come up with. Are there ways to increase knowledge about rare diseases, and can we make the genetics a little easier to access? Okay.
Okay, our question was, Alagille is extremely complex and highly variable, making it a challenge in the clinical, scientific, genetic, and research settings. How can we, the families, support each other and those working in Alagille when our paths are similar but yet so different? So I think what our group agreed on is we're very open with sharing information on the Facebook page. There's a wealth of knowledge out there, but the challenge is how do we get that to the researchers and the clinicians so that they have access to it. And understanding the variability. So we might pose one question on the page, and you might get 6 or 7 different responses for what's worked for their child or for themselves. So that's the challenge, is how do we get it? And I think really the solution, I think it's already there, is the cord registry. And I think what we decided on is we just need to find ways to advocate to get that information to the cord registry. That was a wake-up call for myself. I know it's been on my to-do list, and it will get done when I get back. We also discussed, I think there's a few of us who are very open with sharing any of our medical information for our children. So if I don't know what we need to sign off on, but if anybody wants access to my child's care to help with future research, you can have it. There's many others like that. So we felt ways to help encourage people to register would be, first off, to share stories of how, not necessarily an example with Alagille, but with other rare diseases or in another situation at registry, help them come to some sort of positive solution or medication. To give them an example of, hey, your information is important and this is where it can lead to. And then also getting, like I mentioned, medical records to researchers, and I think there needs to be a concerted effort from some of us in the Alliance to advocate to and share to try to encourage people to sign up, and then we need to share along the way where we are. So I don't know how many have shared today. Maybe we have 50. But when we get to 100, let's make a big deal out of it. When we get to 1,000, continue to progress on where we are, with the amount of information that we're accumulating. And then I think at the end of the day, hopefully we'll have a story to share that's specific to the Alagille group, and then everybody will want to continue to put their data on the cord registry. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we had a couple of groups that also got combined. Shanda, you want to come on up and... You didn't combine with anyone, did you? Any other group? No. Okay. All right, Shanda. So 4 minutes, and when I stand up, that means 30 seconds left.
Oh, stand back. I'd like to point out I also tried to get other people in my group to get up here, and they laughed at me, so that's okay. So both of our questions actually have already been covered, so I'm not going to repeat things that we heard from the other groups, but I will say that many of our conversations reflected the same things that we've already heard. I'm actually going to start with our second question, which is number 8, the one about the high variability that my friend just spoke about. So a lot of the same conversations. Some other pieces that came out with us was the importance of connections between providers. And so that's providers kind of within each of our own experiences, but then also in this room. We talked about how is it that we as families connect? Are those opportunities created for the providers and the researchers and the practitioners that are here in the room to do that? And so could there be a role, whether it's a Facebook group or something better, that we could be structuring your ability to connect in the same ways that we as families are able to connect? We also actually had a really interesting long discussion, of which I only understood part, about whole genome sequencing and some opportunities there to be looking at what might be happening. And so it kind of became a question of if we can get a critical mass of patients with ALGS to have their complete genome sequenced and then make that available to researchers, how that may move things forward. I hope that made sense because I, as I said, only kind of understood it. Good, okay, good, thank you. And then, yep, that was the same thing. And then we really talked about the great thing that the ALGS Alliance does around sharing publications and trials and that sort of stuff, that's been a great role. Whenever something new comes out, you all push it out. So making sure that everyone kind of has access to that, we encourage to continue doing that because those are sort of the things that we saw. So we have 2 pages that were reflective also of your conversation, so I didn't want to repeat it, but that was our question 8. So now I will backtrack. You gave me the really hard questions, I think. They're all hard. Okay, they're all hard. So we also had number 4, which is the 62% of survey respondents have received at least one insurance denial. How can we come together along with clinicians and patient advocacy groups to impact this? What types of systems could potentially be put in place to change this high rate of denials? I think we were almost exclusively all parents around the table, or families around the table for this conversation, which was interesting and appropriate, I think. There are bigger topics I wanted y'all working on, but it was interesting. So we all shared perspectives. We all had really similar experiences, as I'm sure everyone else in this room had. We've all had many denials. We've all spent hours and hours and hours on the phone talking with people. We've established that I am excellent at making people cry. It's a specialty skill of mine. If anyone needs it, let me know. But we did, so I don't want to repeat a lot of what the last group shared, but there were a couple really interesting things that came out I want to make sure that get captured. That again, I'm going to try hard, but you may have to back me up. So we talked about the ICD-10, or the ICD, I thought it was the other way, DC. ICD-10 or ICD-11, which is that list of codes. Yes, I'm getting nods, so I'm on the right track. It's a list of codes for how things are then put through systems and eventually billed for insurance. And so for most of our kiddos, not that this really matters, but anything related to the liver part of Alagille syndrome just gets listed as other congenital defect of the liver. So is there an opportunity for us as a group to be advocating for a more specific code related to our disease? Maybe that'll go nowhere, but it is worth investigating the question. We also talked more about the medical coverage guidelines, which is those set of guidelines that every state has. There's some consistency, but some differences state to state around what they will cover and what they won't cover, and what opportunity we may have to potentially influence what's in there, because that, when the insurance company is saying, am I going to cover this or am I not, that's the document they're going to. So how can we maybe influence that to support our kids a little bit more? And then we had a lot of talk about single point of contact. How can we encourage insurance companies or even hospitals to introduce more patient advocacy? And I think we talked about that has to come from a cost savings place for them. We talked about my case. We've established I make people cry. I have my own person at the insurance company now. I think that's a special person they give you when you've burned out everyone else. I don't care. I don't know why. But I now, when I call, I have one person. She's my designated person. And that's the person I call whenever I have any trouble with insurance. I don't have to explain who I am. I don't have to explain Kate. I don't have to explain anything. She knows. She doesn't have to read me the coverage. She knows I've read the coverage. She knows she better have her A game when she calls me, right? She knows what she's talking about. And it's not that she's my advocate, but she's my one person. And so it makes it that much more streamlined when I call her to do that. So we talked about, can we advocate for helping companies see the benefit for cases like our kids, because our kids, we called ourselves the 1%, right? In hospitals, we're the 1%. Our kids are super involved. Most patients that a doctor or a nurse or someone in a school experience are not going to be like our kids. We're kind of a special case. We all a special case. But having that single point, whether within a hospital or whether within an insurance company, just would streamline our communications from our frustration point, but then also, helping them see the benefit from their point. We were talking about, one of the mothers was sharing, and I don't want to out her if she didn't want to share with everyone, but how they didn't want to cover a treatment, and the other treatment was transplant. And so, they didn't want to cover the elastographic ultrasound. I say the word wrong every time, and my doctor, thank you, they didn't want to cover that. And so the alternative is a biopsy. And can you see how expensive it would be, insurance company, for biopsy, even though you don't want to cover this other treatment that would be a lot less? And most people you talk to, it's black or white, right? It's one or the other. And we don't cover this, we do cover this. Yeah, but that's so much more expensive and so much more invasive. Why wouldn't you cover this thing? There's not a common sense department. So how can we kind of encourage that 1% group that can look at the logical choice, not just the right or wrong choice? And I now have 30 seconds, so let me make sure I got everything. Oh, the last piece was, we talked about having some successes in getting our medications coded so that they're covered. My insurance company covers vitamins right now. I don't want to say it too loud because I don't think they know they're covering her vitamins, but I haven't paid for it in a year. And I'm not asking why because I don't want to know. I don't want them to find out. But if there would be a database in which we can kind of collect what codes did people use that got things covered, it might be helpful for others to then be able to use those same things.
All right, Hannah, I think. All right, your second one, you combined, yes, on that one? Nope, just you?
Yes, but they have to step out.
Oh, perfect, got it. All right, so you go through both of yours. Okay, when I stand up, that means
much-
30 seconds.
How much time do I have? Oh, totally. Everyone's watching me, so. I had number 3. 42% of survey respondents said their physician was not knowledgeable about Alagille syndrome. What are concrete ways the knowledge gap can be addressed and drastically lower this percentage in the next few years? Some of the challenges we had was, this was a common one, what's my role in her and his or her care? You might have, and I was actually approached about this earlier, you might have a neurologist, but they're not adversed into Alagilles. So, or a pediatrician, like obviously you see a lot of these specialties. Do you really need me? That's something that I hear a lot because we never really get colds and ear infections that often, but we get plenty of serious stuff. So what is their role in our care? There's also the problem with they know about the specialties, so they don't need to know about Alagilles. I know how the gastro system works. I know how the liver and the brain works. So what do I need to learn about Alagille syndrome? I've already been to school for this. We did have some people talk about CHOPT and their humility to always learn more and branch, and all the scientists and researchers that are here. That's been amazing to see. But unfortunately, we don't always see that. Doctors will say there's too many cooks in the kitchen. It's hard to connect the dots. You see so many specialists, and the picture just never gets brought together. Sometimes you get a second opinion, you go to the further hospital, but then they don't work with the original doctor and you don't live there. So you're seeing them once a year, but then there's no connection between the actual original doctor. So then you end up lacking care. Can't get prescriptions. That's been covered pretty much through insurance and other issues. The insurance and other people just don't realize, or even a doctor doesn't realize the importance of the prescriptions or the formula. It takes too long for connecting to people and connecting the disease, and then getting denied, going to pediatricians, and they not know that you need the specialist. So there was a lot of common threads with ours. Our solutions were having something to give, both for the parents, having a quick, easy sheet and layman's terms for families and friends, or what's just a quick 5-second, elevator speech to tell your family and friends that they can understand to help bring awareness. How do we explain it the best in layman terms for family and friends? Having a sheet for parents with facts. These are the specialists that you are going to want to know. These are the links to go to for the Children's Network. There's a lot of different groups that have been mentioned over this week. Having those links so we know to be connected to the clinicaltrials.gov. Links like that to just have in one sheet. Someone gets a new diagnosis readily available through the Facebook page, through the Alagille Alliance. And making sure that's getting out to people so they have the awareness of what to expect. Contacting the largest but nearest children's hospital. Most of the people said that they welcome cold messages and discussions, and a lot of the large children's hospitals are where you're going to find most of the information and the doctors that are aware in it. So as a parent, going and calling them and saying, hey, what can my pediatrician do, and connecting them and being the connection. And we all agree that this survey taken by the Alagille Syndrome Alliance was amazing. The questions were really great. Seeing the answers were really great. So having that, taking it on a broader scale, taking a poll and really using that information for people would be beneficial to keep maximizing those surveys and do it again and try to get it out to as many people as possible. I also had number 7, 55% of survey respondents said they do not feel they have a voice in Alagille syndrome research. Due to variability, patients may believe their voice is just one person and not strong enough to have an impact. How can the patient voice continue to be effectively heard after today? The biggest challenges were, one, as a parent or a family member or an adult dealing with it, how do you know how to participate? Some people said this, they weren't sure that after today and seeing the surveys, scientists are realizing maybe they're not asking the correct questions. They know about the liver plasticity, but obviously itching and this and that, like what do the patients really need? Navigating sites for both scientists, researchers, and families like PubMed, finding research, finding correct information, not through Google, and then sorting through the misinformation. What actually is accurate, correct data? Obviously, there are websites like the National PubMed, and educating the process of the research. I'm not gonna lie, I did not realize how many hoops and guidelines and laws and regulations there are that there really are working on research for the future of families and patients. But it's a long process, and I did not know the expectations of that process. So educating families on what that process is, every piece of the puzzle helps. Symposiums like this, where patients and the medical can make the connections and the medical world can hear our stories and ask these questions with patients. Having a site to correlate an advisory board to sort the misinformation for us, so researchers and scientists and clinicians can come to the Alagille Alliance and they can tell them about their research and their studies and everything they're doing, and then the Alagille Alliance bring it to the patients and the family, and there be some sort of advisory board, or we're finding this information online and this was a published study, how can we represent it to families? And just having some sort of advisory board that can bridge the gap, close it in smaller, and then sort the misinformation and make sure that the correct knowledge is getting out there to further research. and building this Alagille Syndrome Alliance. We are a pretty small alliance. We understand that there's not a lot of people working on this, and we're very thankful for those of you that are dedicating your time. But not just being aware and spreading awareness of our story, but really spreading the Alagille Syndrome Alliance, raising money for them, adding staff so that way they can have an advisory board, giving them the resources that they can as a patient and a family. That's what our story does for people. And just engage in the science, the family connection. Those polls were really great. If there was a way the Alagille Syndrome Alliance could take a poll on an ongoing poll of how many people are willing to be a part of clinical studies and things like that. The biggest problem with research and science is that they're getting their information from clinicians and what's out there. And unfortunately, it's just whatever feels relevant, whatever people want to study, or it's misinformation. So having more people involved in those studies and making it from a small study of 100 to a study of 500 and getting more information out there. So if there was a way the Alagille Alliance could poll or keep people, so that way when there are studies and research going on and they come to people and say, hey, we're studying your disease, then you can be like, I have 5 families, that would be perfect for that study. And then connecting more people and engaging them into those studies so that way we can really make an impact. And those were pretty much everything.
Thank you. Dr. Huppert, you want to come on up? You combined with Shammy for one of yours?
Yes.
Okay, okay, all right. Okay.
So I will be very quick.
Okay. You want me to
Because
stand right here?
Nancy, yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah, you can stand right here. Because Nancy already covered really what the problems were with the misdiagnosis. You outlined those. So I'm going to go through maybe we kind of came up with some crazy things to go after for maybe some potential studies or research going forward. So Nancy talked about genetic tests and maybe some ways to get faster diagnosis. In our group, we again talked about, which I think Alagille Alliance has discussed, with facial recognition programs using AI, and potentially it could work early, although I know the clinicians say that at early birth the classic facial structure isn't so apparent, but maybe AI training could figure that out for us. And another area that we kind of thought about is this will be very important as there are drugs that become available to go to clinical trial, is we really need to have a biomarker to really show that there is a response to the therapy, whether it's working or not working. And so one thing we thought about was a more sensitive test to evaluate levels of jagged or notch activity. Right now, we know that there are no ELISAs, which is one sensitive test that we can check for the levels of jagged that's found in the serum. Right now, there isn't a test that's available to researchers, so that might be something we should try to work on developing. And the last, just to get education and awareness for misdiagnosis to other subspecialties. I think, obviously, if you end up in a peds liver clinic, I think we're fairly good with figuring this out. But if you end up in neurology, especially if later don't have a liver problem, but you end up with a neurologist, a cardiologist, or a nephrologist, it would be good to try to disseminate some information to them. And us as researchers and clinicians that were at the table, this is really having a presence at those clinical meetings, because people at those meetings are wanting to learn more about different diseases and their research. So it'd be good to have that. And also, I think everybody else has talked about this, having the key clinical papers that you can have accessible as a family when you walk into these other subspecialties that are really high-powered information, not overwhelming them, but to get them engaged and involved.
Sandra, do you want to come up? I think. question 3? Yeah, go ahead. I think you're the last one, too.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so someone already, I think Hannah did already question 3. We worked on question, well, I'm going to read it again. It's about the physicians not being knowledgeable about Alagille syndrome. And we were supposed to identify what the true challenge associated with this question was, and also to come up with potential solutions that we could do to inform, to prepare for the future scientific inquiry and therapeutic discovery, and to positively impact the patient care. So we all agreed that that we have to start by accepting that Alagille syndrome is a rare condition, and this is a fact, and that we cannot expect every physician to know about it. And from there, to start thinking of solutions. So Dr. Piccoli shared with me a saying, an American saying, and he said, people here think that if we build it, they will come. So he said, the Alagille Syndrome Alliance, we should build it for them to come. So we came up with a 3-step strategy to lower the gap about knowledge in Alagille syndrome. And we thought that the premise for this strategy is that the Alagille Syndrome Alliance has to commit to being the best source of information about Alagille syndrome. And step 1 would be the Alagille Syndrome Alliance should pay for placement in the web. We should pay to be in the top searches online. I don't know if you've heard that first, the best place to hide a dead body is the second page in Google. So we did the exercise, and we Googled Alagille, and the first three options were first genetics, then Wikipedia, and then CHOP, not Alagille syndrome. So we think that we should pay to be there in the top 3. Second step would be building the community. And so we believe that we should work on a project for communication and dissemination on information about Alagille syndrome, and that for that we should ask the PCORI to give the Alliance a grant to work on that project, because at the end, most projects need expertise, but also funds to make an impact. And the third, but not less important, step we thought is we should work on, the Alliance should work on the content on the website, and just make sure that we have the most updated content, and that we have relevant testimonies from patients, and that our content is always the best, so that when people go online and search for Alagille, they'll all find the Alliance. So thank you. This is our answer for question 3.
Okay, I think that's everyone. I didn't miss anyone, did I? Nope, okay. So that kind of wraps this session up. We really hope that that you were able to get some knowledge, make some connections, some things that will actually impact your work now, your future work, and I hope that the families were able also to make connections and get some additional knowledge. A couple of administrative type things. So this session here was not part of the webcast, but we will start webcasting in about 1 hour. We'll start webcasting, and the symposium, all of the main sessions, will be webcast on our YouTube channel. The content from this meeting will go out to everyone. Just give me a couple days. or maybe 5 days. Give me 5 days. And then slides from all of the other presentations throughout the weekend can also be made available to you, and we'll post those as well on our website. The symposium is going to kick off at 4, right next door here, so you're going to have a little bit of time. We did end a little early. If anybody has any last things that they want to add, or any question that didn't get answered that maybe can impact the whole group, we have a couple of minutes. If not, I'm going to let you guys go and get some rest. Anyone? Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the 8 moderators. I know that was challenging and a little bit uncomfortable being up here, but thank you all so much for doing that for us. And again, everyone in this room is a piece of this puzzle, so thank you for your participation, and really hope that you got a lot out of it. So thank you, guys.